welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined, as always, by Alan and James. Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, a bit upset. You know, my routine's been hammered by Celtic TV losing the pictures from the game. I think it affected people on pay-per-view. Again, just for those that don't know, maybe, but I completely rely on the Celtic TV rerun to collect all the data and then all the articles and the stat packs and all that kind of flow from there. So not having it was a bit of a blow. And then I started thinking about, if I've got a gap in the data, then all the averages will be wrong, and all these horrible thoughts go through my head. But it's up there now, so I'll get to it later in the week. But things will be a little bit delayed. So that's my OCD well and truly kicked.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the best viewing experience, but you can just do what I normally do, is pretend you watched it and just bluff your way through the podcast anyway.
Yeah, you just remember, Laura, that Jack Butland's not our goalkeeper; he's their goalkeeper. You just need to remember that. Yeah,
that's right. All that time at his bedside this weekend was wasted. Then, anyway,
tragic.
James, how are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, we need to be upfront with, we try to take ourselves fake seriously. And so there is not a forensic examination of the game as we usually do, i.e. watching it live or close thereabouts live, in Alan's case sometimes, and then maybe a second watch. I didn't even get to watch the second half yet. I saw some clips on Y-Scout. That kind of thing. But I enjoyed the gap and then the pixelated mess that did return for a period of time that seemed to be making the rounds on Twitter. So that was my experience. So yes, a lot of reliance on the first, let's say 50 minutes, 55 maybe it was, and then all the various statistical reports from the different vendors to take a look at how the game proceeded today.
Yeah, well, I guess there's no better place to start than there. James, what was your thoughts on the St Mirren game overall, as much as and we'll get into as much detail as we can on it?
Yeah, it's I don't have a great way to characterize it. I think it's a matter of reference, kind of context, and expectations. So I think a lot of people, including myself, were hopeful coming out of the debacle that was last Thursday. Hoping that we would kind of, reassert, come out with a really great performance, dominate the game, not necessarily win 4-0 or 5-0. The scoreline less so than just a really high quality, dominant performance. And the way I think of that is playing the way we want to play, imposing our style of play on a team like St. Mirren. It's coming to Celtic Park. So I don't think that happened. Again, caveat that I still have about a half hour, a little more than that, to revisit when I can get my hands on it. So that caveat, but looking at the data of the part of the match I didn't watch, it didn't look like things got lit on fire in that last half hour that I missed, and that the way we scored, the way that St. Mirren played, I think important context here too, because we can get into that a little more. I don't think they set up to present a lot of the challenges that we've been talking about in recent weeks that we worry about and that kind of manifested at large at Ibrox. They didn't do a lot of that. So, I think it was kind of just it's like one of those games. It wasn't the worst. Wasn't, if it was just a run of the mill, next up in the long list of winter fixtures with no winter break, you'd be like, well, you won 3-0, you skushed through it. It wasn't the most entertaining game. That would be fine. But given coming out of the debacle that was last Thursday, I think a lot of people were hoping for more. So I think that kind of set expectations higher. And we'll probably touch on some of the analytical points, not the actual gossipy brouhaha that's commenced since the post-match press conference from Rodgers. But I think there were some legitimate kind of style play issues that we can talk about that, given the expectations, that kind of collective what people I think were hoping would happen, and I include myself in that. I think that it's difficult to argue that those things did happen. So I suspect that some of the kind of deflation inside the grounds that sounds like to have occurred may have been kind of a vibe off of what actually was happening on the pitch to a degree, which it wasn't thrill-seeking style of play that was unfolding.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should probably offer my thoughts here as well as having seen the majority of the match or the bits of the match that we could see. I think what I'm just struggling with the team in general, and we had a little bit of a discussion before coming on here, there just seems to be, I don't know if it's the number of games that we're playing or something to do with, just the size of the squad, which I appreciate is bigger than the majority of other squads in the league, but I just think we look like we're taking a while to get going in games, which we haven't been doing as much up until now. And I think that, what it's like at Celtic Park, I think sometimes the crowd can get a bit agitated if we're not, leading within the first 20 minutes, and that can be the case. But Alan, I'll come to you on this one. I guess some of the narrative that's coming out after the game, there are people questioning the style of play, and I appreciate you can't talk specifically about the St Mirren game, but do you think there's any merit in the discussion around that and what it's warranted in terms of some of the criticism of the way that we're approaching games at the moment?
I think it's all fair game. I mean, we're here to look at performance, right? Not the score, but the actual, how we got to the score. That's what we're focusing on. And Celtic are the dominant side in the league financially and on virtually every other metric. Therefore, our expectations are reasonably high, I think, and I don't think that's unreasonable at all. But I think where we are in the season in terms of context, there's a few things going on here. So we've just come off the back of what was an absolutely abject performance, of which there have been 2 in the season, and they've ended in really heavy defeats. Like, not just, we lost the game, it was a bit tight and we weren't quite good enough to get it over the line type of thing. These were absolute hammerings. Right? I mean, awful, like almost from the first minute to the last, with zero kind of, rays of light in either the Dortmund game or the Ibrox game, where the way that the team was set up and the way that the players performed was just so, inappropriate to the demands of the actual game. So, because it happened, James talks about the sort of the sparkle of the derby dust, right? Well, there's another side to that, right? It's the splatter when the S hits the F, right? And that tends to get spread far and wide in the sort of days and weeks following a result like that. And everyone kind of gets inflicted with little splatters of that. So, and everybody wants to have someone to blame, and everyone wants to try and sort of make sense of it. So. And I think, that also then unpicks the scab of those that still aren't buying into Rodgers in general, still aren't buying into his style of play, who still are hooked up on this idea that it's a very kind of horseshoe-driven, slow, predictable pedestrian style of play. So all that bubbles up to the surface again after a defeat like that. Then you've just got the realities of this season and the way that the games have been jam-packed into this part of the year. It's not just it's been a hellishly busy November, December, January, and then February will also be very busy. And if you look at the rest of the league, some of the results and teams are all over the place. St Mirren won 3, lost 3. Ross County have suddenly started winning games. Aberdeen have just gone down a toilet. Hearts have started to grind out some results. Hibs went on a bit of a run and then stuttered again. And of course, we've seen the Rangers' performances as well. Either side of the derby have been pretty mixed as well. So this is a natural, this is natural in terms of just playing games every 3 or 4 days. And if you look at the number of changes that teams are making to lineups has increased. Rodgers has actually averaged 3.5 personnel changes per game in the league. Never mind, in other matches. So I think all of those things, despite the fact we've been pretty either blessed or well managed in terms of injury, to be fair, but he has made a conscious effort to rotate the squad. So I think all these things come into it. The other thing that comes into it, I think, is when you start the season like Celtic did, and you kind of hammer everybody in the first 11 fixtures of the rotation. Every time you then play that next team again, they're going to go all out to stop that, right? Everyone can see that Celtic are dominant. They're of a big lead at the top of the table. So the mindset isn't to sort of. There's very little hint in any of the teams that we will play of I reckon we can have a go at these today. Most teams are going to dig in. Most teams are going to set up to be fairly difficult to play against. So I think you've got that aspect of it. In not so much on the weekend there, or sorry, the Mirren game got gone as far as I could tell. But a lot of the games that we've played prior to that in the league have been played in pretty poor conditions, and especially wind. I mean, rain, sleet, even a poor surface, most footballers can kind of cope with. But wind's the one thing that does kind of ruin a game, or certainly it reduces the quality of any game. And I think that tends to play against Celtic in terms of if you want to play passing football with a lot of emphasis on technique and touch, adverse conditions tend to penalise that style of play more than a more sort of direct style of play. That's not a major issue. It's just another little thing to add to the list of things that I think have been going on. And then, we've talked as well about just the fact that teams are set up in a way that's very much set to, Celtic don't vary their formation. There's some teams in the league, and we'll see this with Dundee United coming up, who vary their formation, vary their personnel, vary their style of play, depending on who they're playing. St Mirren generally don't actually, and neither does Celtic. But it doesn't mean that Celtic it's predictable in terms of what you're going to get. It's just a question of can you stop it? And St Mirren didn't, Kilmarnock didn't, Hibs didn't, even though those performances were not the best, and hence why there's this gap at the top of the table. So, the second half of the season, I think, will be more spotty because of that. But there's a whole set of other dynamic factors that have to be brought into play, like the recruitment and so forth. So, I'm not. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not worried. I can see lots of good reasons why things are the way they are. And we saw, Rodgers getting a bit agitated after the Dortmund game and a bit defensive, and he's been agitated and defensive after Ibrox, and for the same reasons, I suspect. Greg Taylor's become a bit of collateral damage in that, but I think the main issue with Rodgers at the moment is he's just feeling a bit battered and bruised, and his massive ego is feeling a bit dented after Ibrox, and rightly so. Not adverse to giving the manager a kick up the arse either. But yeah, that for me, that's the kind of contextual landscape that I would paint. None of which makes excuses for anybody. I hope that's not my intention, but I think it just all helps to maybe explain a little bit where we are.
Yeah, to pick up on some of that, James, of what Alan said, did you think St Mirren came into the game, from what you saw of the game, and played in the way that you would expect them to play? Obviously, we're talking about them being predictable and things like that. Were they predictable? Do you think they tried to do anything in any way different to what we've seen from them before?
I actually think they skewed more towards playing against us at Celtic Park, like they've been trying to play against a lot of teams, including at home for them. So I thought they'd be more defensive. I thought they'd be less high pressing, even though they, as I talked about on the Extra Time show last week and the previewing the game briefly, was they've been one of the more advanced high pressing teams. They've had this kind of duality of high press and then being decent again for their level on the counterattack. And I thought they would tweak that a little bit. Again, just looking at how we've struggled with certain facets of how Dundee United set up, how Rangers set up, how Bruges set up. Like there's a definite kind of thread that goes through these teams, and they're not doing things the exact same way, but it's basically, we've been talking about it. A lot of people have been talking about it. Let our center backs have the ball, shield McGregor, wait for us to make mistakes, basically be narrow, be compact. I didn't think St. Mirren did any of that other than shielding McGregor. Like they kind of had a 1-1 in their striker, and their, nominally had two strikers and one kind of dropped to shield McGregor or to man mark him. But outside of that, I didn't think they were deploying what I'm, calling the Bruges script, so to speak, in how to frustrate us and to kind of press some of our pressure points as far as build up and our on ball talent at the center back position and our midfield in build up, that kind of thing. So I didn't think they did most of that. And I think that's why the context of the game was a little more concerning to me, is because, again, with thinking that we'd have this reaction coming off of the Rangers game, hopefully, and maybe unrealistically, maybe a lot of that was the emotional rebound that we have in hoping, given how bad that performance was. But yeah, we normally if we're fully firing a team that sets up the way that St. Mirren did, we would shred them, like rip them apart. And I don't think we did that. I think we were okay at times, and certain players, like Engels, Ida, they were able to use that space and get on the ball, but didn't do all that much with it most of the time once they were on the ball. So it's kind of this dual-edged sword that we're having, where we're either having problems getting on the ball, guys like Bernardo, struggling in build-up, or if they do get on the ball, guys like Ida, then being kind of wasteful, or Hatate being wasteful. So yeah, it wasn't great. And so that will lead us in when we talk about Dundee, because Dundee United, they will very likely
you think you're working for Sky Sports or somebody, James? Get it right.
Are more likely to be, in that script that I'm worrying more and more about, which is, compact and defensive and probably man marking McGregor, that kind of thing. But so if I graded on a curve, I think our grade's actually kind of low for the game, given the specific circumstances of how they set up. Now, the one thing I will address that was St. Mirren specific, that supplements what Alan said. So I think what's happening, so if you look at it, I wrote my Monday column that's on the huddlebreakdown.com. I looked at, kind of what when people say match tempo, like what does that mean and how do you define it, and what are some metrics we can look at. And so if you look at the speed with which, and I'm not saying what it is, I'm just saying some of the things I looked at and what some of the metrics could suggest, is if you look at like the rate at which we pass, just number of passes per minute of possession, for example, it's actually like at a 10-year high, meaning that we pass really quickly and move the ball at a pace that's even higher than what we saw, not a lot higher, but marginally higher than what we saw in like peak Ange ball, for example. We're not as direct. We're not, kind of pumping passes forward at the same rate, but we're talking about margins of difference here of, let's say, 2%. And what that means in a game is like somewhere between 10 to 15 passes. That's it. Like between the directness of an Ange team versus the style that Rodgers has been playing with. So we're talking not tectonic plate type movements here. These are relatively minor shifts. So I think this club that, as Alan said, kind of got this latent still scab that gets picked off, where people really aren't that pro Rodgers because of some of the legacy issues. If you compare these metrics to his first tenure with his second, it's not even close. Like, we were on a relative basis slow, methodical, particularly in like the 17-18 season and into the 18-19 season, less so in the first season. But even the game on Sunday against St. Mirren, from that perspective, was faster paced than kind of any of those seasons under Rodgers. It just feels a lot slower because of what we've been experiencing recently, including under Rodgers. What I will say is we were less direct than normal. We something like progressive passes, which is like a inferior distant cousin to Allen's packing scores and pack passing, were materially down. Kind of back passing versus forward passing, so that sense, in this part of the root of Rodgers' comments, and people weren't just dreaming that up. Like, there, people that attend matches and watch this, you get this kind of kinetic feeling and sense, intuition of how things are going on. So I think the crowd was probably absorbing some of that, because it was relatively slower. I'm not saying absolutely slow. I'm going to say it was relatively slower than play has been. It was relatively less direct, and there was relatively less passing going on in the final third. So those all are reflected in the data. So the crowd responding, it's like I said, it wasn't some hallucination. There's probably a pretty good bit of objective evidence. So at the same time as the club being used to beat Rodgers, that his style of play generally has been, these things I think is wholly inaccurate. But on a relative basis for Sunday, I think it actually was. Now, my what I'm hypothesizing about is, and kind of deliberating on, is why that happened on Sunday, and are there tweaks going on where they're starting to try to implement some things to deal with some of these problems that we're having against something that St. Mirren didn't present, meaning that we kind of try to make some tactical tweaks to deal with the Bruges script, and then St. Mirren maybe surprised us a little bit and didn't play that way, and were pressing us more aggressively and higher than we maybe expected, and that there was some growing pains, so to speak, in some of the adjustments that we're making to deal with the problem that wasn't evident on Sunday. So that I just want to throw that all out there, because there's a lot of nuance there, but I think there's fairness in like Sunday criticism, but generally not so much.
Yeah, so James, just a couple of questions from me really on that. So one is directly related to that study that you did, and the second is more specific to the St Mirren game. So firstly, do you think that one factor might be that, especially since Rodgers' first term, but as you say, Celtic were playing demonstrably slower than they are now, the increased prevalence of more direct long ball football in the league as a whole makes us seem relatively pedestrian. I've not even done any number crunching on this to see whether there are actually more long balls. It is more direct, but I suspect on a relative basis. And it's a shame that Opta analysts used to provide this exact view on style of play using directness and speed to goal and all that sort of thing, and they're not doing it yet, or they haven't done it yet for the Scottish League. So I'm missing that view. But I suspect the gap between the way Celtic play and the way that every other team, and I mean every other team in the league plays, in terms of level of directness, is a chasm now. Yeah. It was apart from St Johnson. And is that perhaps adding to the perception? That's my first question. The second question is, so everything you said about the St Mirren game surprises me. We've put Adam Ida in as a striker, which makes you think, oh, that gives you the option to go more direct and to go earlier. And yet when I looked at his heat map, it looked like he was playing on the centre circle. So I just wanted to get a view on Ida's performance relative to how we were trying to play is the second question.
Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for the first, unfortunately. I'll have to dig into that a little bit on the league side. As far as generally, I agree with your logic, meaning that would make sense on a reference basis. I think the low hanging fruit here is more so, So again, if you look at passes per minute, the next slowest game that we had, and it's it's a material difference. I mean, the lowest, which was Sunday, the next slowest was at Rugby Park when we won 2-0 in 50-mile-an-hour winds on a pitch that was dry and an abomination. I joked in my column that I wrote, it was like, basically a hurricane, a rugby match played in the middle of a hurricane, right? That tempo was a good bit faster than what we just experienced. And then the next one was the 5-0 at Ross County, which was like way quicker. So this was really slow. So I think that reference, meaning that objectively we were slow, with anything around us from a purely Celtic perspective. I'll have to look into it. I think that could it makes sense logically if the overall league is tempo is up. The other thing I'll say relative to Ida, so again, I mentioned a little bit, is that he was very effective at getting on the ball. So because of the way St. Mirren set up, they were leaving gaps. They weren't compact necessarily. And they actually tried to play a high line, relatively speaking, which, for example, led to contributed anyway to the first goal off of the goal kick transition. It's just, and this is becoming a bigger issue with Ida, is he just isn't that productive once he gets on the ball, unless he's in the final third finishing, or like doing the nice little link up, the triangles and ticky-tacky stuff, which I'm not sure he's good at that, but at least I've seen evidence that he might be good at it. What I'm seeing more and more evidence of is he is definitively not good at dropping deep and then either turning and carrying or, pinging passes. Like, he's okay just dropping it back, making the simple pass. And Engels, to a degree, is similar. Engels did a great job of getting on the ball. And then, he's fine with playing the simple balls, either direct back or a little, sideways lateral. It's a turning and doing something any creative or productive or material, getting the ball up the pitch and taking out defenders, that kind of the pack passing. He's not showing much evidence of that yet. The last thing I'll say is that we actually did go longer. So the long ball passing rate was up, and particularly against, part of what I did with my column and analysis was do what I called a custom benchmark of small clubs. And I made sure to clarify that wasn't a derogatory classification was more so, financial resources. So if you back out the Edinburgh clubs, Aberdeen and Rangers, and look at all of our other opponents over the last 10 seasons, where generally they're going to be more defensive, generally going to have the ball a lot less. We're going to post higher XG, higher goal scoring rate, all of that stuff. I wanted to see how Sunday compared to that specific segment. And our long ball rate was up a good bit. So I do think we were trying to go direct a little more. And it's hard to say how much of that was strategy and how much of that was in reaction to them actually high pressing us a little bit. I should say a little bit, like for them, quite a lot actually. So it's hard to, attribute which one of those two, but I agree with you. Like it wasn't all that effective for the most part. And Ida's participation was less so in that regard, getting in behind, and more so, doing something I think he's not all that well suited for.
Yeah, just to contribute on that Ida chat, from my observations, and again, I don't have the data to back up what I'm saying here, but I'm wary of the discussion about him veering into cliche and things like that in terms of he's a big man, keep him up top kind of thing. But I do think just looking at the way that he plays and where his strengths lie, he's certainly more dangerous when he's in the box than he is anywhere else. I know somebody will be able to clip something up and show me some version of him being able to lay somebody else in or rifle a ball from outside the box or something similar. But I do feel a little bit like he's a good, when he drops deep, he is good at flicking the ball on, Chris Sutton style, that kind of thing. But like you say, when he takes possession of the ball and he's got to turn and run at the goal, I think that is where he kind of, where he's a little bit stunted in comparison to other players. And by the way, I don't actually think Kyogo's that good at that either from a deep position compared to Ida, even though they are two very different players. I think they still, as much as they offer very different things, I don't think either of them are particularly skilled at that part of the game. And so it does make it difficult when he does have to come deep like that and kind of try to find the ball and take it forward. You're much more worth your time giving it to somebody like Luke McCowan to progress the play, pushing it out wide to Kuhn or to Maeda, and I think that's where we really find our strength in that. Alan, speaking of Luke McCowan, we did see a little bit from him today. I don't know if James has a different opinion on it, but I thought it was one of his quieter games in general. I thought while he contributed, I thought he was, again, just using the eye test, I just didn't notice as much of what he did this week as I normally do. Alan, where's your opinion on Luke McCowan in terms of how much we've been using him recently and what his position is in the hierarchy of the squad compared to players like Engels, Hatate and similar?
Yeah, I think we're almost at the stage where it seems like, you play one, let's call it more kind of athletic box-to-box types. So it's either Bernardo or Engels, and then you play one sort of magic-y dust type player, so that's Hatate or McCowan. And I think I'm oversimplifying all of those players because I think that they've all got different attributes, very much so. But just as a simplistic characterization. So yeah, all I really saw was the goals. I saw him, nicely weighted pass from Maeda to set up that first goal. I saw on the stats bomb data, it didn't look like he had a huge amount of involvement in the game, like you said. But again, you don't get that from 60 minutes and then your sub again, etc. He's not really had a run of games. My view would be, given Hatate's consistent inconsistency now over quite a long period, I would be tempted to be giving him that sort of magic dust roll. Go and drop, as Kevin Keegan once said of Paul Scholes, go and drop little grenades around the pitch, cause issues for the defence, cause them problems, do unexpected things. That's the sort of player I think, both Hatate and McCowan are. I think McCowan's probably got a bit more energy and running about him, from what I've seen. A bit more all action, I suppose. So I'd just like to see him have a run in the team. And I know that the number 8s for Celtic, they do a lot of running, and Rodgers has kept them all happy, given them all minutes. But I think there'll come a time when it might be the young boys game where it's like, right, I trust these guys, sort of thing. And it has hitherto been Hatate and Bernardo, actually, but McCowan and Engels, I think, are probably more in form at this time. But and again, as we've said with Engels, you're not going to see the best of him if you keep switching sides, giving him different roles, and giving him 10 minutes here and 20 minutes there, sort of thing. So like any player, they need a bit of a consistent run. But Rodgers has got to balance that with what we talked about, which is just the sheer volume of games as well. But to me, he shows a lot of promise in a Celtic shirt. He's clearly got the to go all non-data. I think he's got the personality for it, the kind of the self-confidence, the belief, the to and want to try things, and he has had from the start. So give him a go, because, as I say, I honestly don't feel Hatate's really justifying being that first choice at the moment. I mean, hopefully that comes back, but that has been consistent for a little while now, I'd say.
Yeah, Alan, I'll come back to you in a second to talk about another area of the team that you've written about a few times this season and again this week. But before I do, James, just to close out the conversation on the St Mirren game, I know everybody thinks that we sometimes go a little bit negative. We did win 3-0, I appreciate that, but we're here to assess how we got that 3-0 rather than the outcome of the game. But just any closing thoughts on what you saw of the St Mirren game, and maybe a little bit from yourself on Luke McCowan and how you felt he performed at the weekend?
Yeah, so with McCowan first, because that's pretty quick, is your sense was supported by the data. He was not on the ball that much on a relative basis. As far as the midfielders go, he was the least involved. I don't say that in a negative basis, meaning that Engels was seemingly felt like he was all over the place, and he kind of was. And he did a very good job of going into space and making himself an option. So the part that that McCowan offers is that kind of line breaking, creative or ability to, put pressure on the defense in a quick way as you transition it from, defense to midfield to attack. Saw that. I think he was the one that made the pass out to Maeda in the transition on the first goal. So those are kind of balls that he's very adept at making those passes, and he's very good at. So that was also reflected in the data. I mean, he when he was on the ball, he's going to be a little bit more variant like Hatate, but he's actually been skewing more positive than Hatate is when you talk about risk reward. His rewards have been enough that you kind of are okay or better putting up with the downsides. And he's also not been as bad at doing it in really poor positions, deep in kind of defensive half. So the other things I thought Trusty Trusty, I think, is going to continue to look good relative to defending, his movement, his kind of positional. But the main issue, I mean, it's hard not to revisit that he got pulled for Liam Scales in the cup final because the manager thought that Scales offered a better on-ball threat. And I think, we're still not seeing, and Sunday we certainly didn't. I mean, he wasn't awful on the ball. I just don't think he's going to be a dynamic ball-playing center back. I just don't think that's what his skill set is, whether it's carrying it or, he's not Chris Iyer, going to be carrying the ball 30, 40 yards and getting the ball up the pitch that way under any kind of pressure. Like, he's fast enough. He's going to be able to do it as, Dedrick Boyata was fine doing that too. Like, the Celtic center backs will oftentimes be left with just massive gaps of space and be able to carry it. It's a question of whether they're able to either get into that final half or the attacking half and do something with it. I suspect he's probably not going to. I think it's just kind of who he is, and he's already at an age. I mean, it's just probably not going to be a development thing. But I thought he was okay. Like, I think the upside for that is in Europe, because of his pace, because of his defensive solidity and positional sense. I think that's a big positive. It's just going to be that issue of on the ball. So that would be the other thing that came out of the game, I thought, was, him starting, of course. And, not until he does something that begins to suggest that something on the ball is changing. I think that's going to be a continued area of concern with buildup. And it's back to, I stole in my column Alan's patent, one of his catchphrases, which is toxic combinations, right? And that's when we have those two center backs. I'll segue into Alan's segment here and looking at the left back position, and then these issues of players dropping and making themselves available when they do get into space, like Engels or Ida, or don't, like Bernardo. And then what do they do once they get on the ball? That's why I think this Bruges script is so concerning if teams do actually follow it, is because some of these issues to me look endemic. I'm not sure there's a solution to them other than something that our manager probably isn't looking to do, or at least showed no signs of, which is change the setup and or start going along more, going direct. And I don't mean like 4.5% versus 5% or 6%. I'm talking like go 10, 12, like double your rate of long balls because you're really going direct. And I'll be surprised if that's the path we end up going.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, but we shall see. We'll do a little bit of a preview of the Dundee United game just after this. But Alan, I wanted to talk to you, as James alluded to, about the left back position. You've been keeping a close eye on both Taylor and Valle. You've written about it. I guess, Greg Taylor's very much a hot topic amongst the Celtic support at the moment. The discussions around whether he's a particular weak point in the team, whether the rumoured return of Kieran Tierney will be an upgrade for us. I guess none of the three of us want to go into the more dramatic elements of the discussion that has happened around recently, but I guess my general question to you is, what have you observed looking closely at Valle and Taylor? And to that end, is the criticism of Greg Taylor warranted, or certainly as warranted as it might appear?
Well, as we know, a week is a very long time in football, and if we remember the start of the season, we brought Valle in on loan, but Taylor remained the first choice. But then there was a little bit of rotation, and then Taylor looked to have won that battle, and Rodgers made a point of talking about how I think the phrase he uses was he tidied up his play, which I thought was an excellent way of putting it, because if that almost encapsulate my concerns about Greg Taylor in one phrase, it would be just tidying up some very obvious loose edges, especially in possession, and how easily he can give the ball away sometimes. The other aspect being his kind of recovery pace, which I don't think is something that can be changed, sadly. So he looked like he'd solidified his place, but then in parallel to this, we've had this, non-contract renewal issue bubbling along. And, my observation is that, Taylor's form's kind of dipped the closer we've got to the January window, and him being sort of technically, in Bosman, free to talk to everyone else kind of territory there. And, and it all sounds a bit messy, and that Rodgers clearly has been very consistent about saying he wants to keep him. Taylor, as far as we know, wants to stay, but then Taylor's agent is probably pushing for as much as he can get, and that can all cause some tensions there. And then we've got the Tierney thing adding yet more. So it's a bit of a soap opera, a bit of a drama. It became a bit of a drama at the weekend. That's not what I want to spend any more time talking about. Valle had nearly got to 900 minutes, the magic sort of benchmark where the data starts to reveal a bit more of the truth about a player after that amount of minutes. So that it seemed like an apt time to take stock of, with Taylor's form, I think, not being great, a few high-profile mistakes in the last few games. And it was one of these. So in terms of my own method on this, which I'm not intending to bore people with, the reason I'm saying this is because when I write these pieces, I generally have like anyone else would, have a preconception in my head as to what I'm going to find when I kind of get all the data together, plonk it down, and then look at it and say, talk to me. I generally think I know what it's going to tell me, and where I get really excited is when that is actually false, and it starts to tell me a different thing to what I expected. Then I get really excited. So that happens occasionally, which is good, and that happened in this case really. So what I was expecting was to see a very inconclusive set of results that were really not a lot between them, that a kind of not performing great Greg Taylor was going to be much the same as a young, sort of developing Valle, really. That's kind of how I had it positioned in my mind. And the second thing that I expected was that, well, even if Valle does look quite good, he's probably not played anywhere near the minutes in the Champions League or in the big matches that Taylor has, and therefore that'll any sort of positiveness in the data towards the young Spanish lad will kind of be explainable with that context. So that was my sort of perception bias going in. But what I found was really Valle's numbers were very impressive when you compare them against Taylor specifically. And listen, it's on the pieces on huddledbreakdown.com, so please, there's a lot of detail in there. It's quite a long piece, quite detailed, as I say. But so I'll just hit on the highlights really. And the real standout difference between the two is really in ball progression broadly. Defensively, there's not a lot between them, and whereas James gets worried about Valle, I think, and he gets worried about how erratic he is and how he's a bit random what he does and can give the ball away. I don't disagree with that, but the difference between the two is that Taylor tends to give the ball away in his own half, and Valle tends to lose the ball in the attacking third. So it's obviously much less risky to do that. Clearly, Taylor losing the ball in his own defensive third potentially causes a lot more problems. But in terms of ball progression, the difference between not so much the pack passing, that was quite similar, but it's the receiving pack passes. So finding space, being available for the pass, therefore progressing the team forward by being the receiver, not the giver of the pass. But Valle is vastly better at Taylor than that. Now, I was even surprised when I looked at their heat maps, because I thought, well, Taylor's inverting a lot. He's inside. He's in the congested midfield area. Of course, he's not going to get as much of the ball. Valle's hugging the touchline. He's going to get a lot of the ball, but then he's from that far wide, he's not going to be able to do as much with it. But actually, if you look at the heat maps, they're not massively different. Taylor is a little bit more expansive in his movements. He does cover much more of the pitch, and his little red area does seep a little bit further across the right hand side. But it's not. I wouldn't say it's compelling. I wouldn't say it's certainly not the case that you've got Taylor as this inverted fullback covering a lot of the centre of the pitch, and you've got Valle with a big red line going across down the left touchline. It's nowhere near that. They're very more similar, I would say. So looking at that, looking at the fact that Valle had a significantly higher, he creates more chances, a higher expected assist rate. He's better at crossing the ball. He's better getting the ball into the danger area. All those things. It was actually, if you were doing a data analysis, you would have Valle ranked significantly higher than you would Taylor if you were doing a sort of benchmarking exercise. And then I looked at, well, who have they played against? And actually, both of them have played about 20% of their minutes in the Champions League, both of them. So there was actually no difference, really, in the strength of the opposition. For example, Valle, I think, may have played against Slovan, and Taylor would have played in Atlanta. So there will be some nuance to that, of course, but not. Again, it wasn't the case that Valle only played at home to Falkirk and Taylor played all the difficult European games.
Who played against Dortmund? Just out of interest.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. Let's not go there. So the focus of the piece really was that, and this is where I'm looking forward to James chiming in, because I don't think he would instinctively have agreed with what I've just said. Is that to me, it looks to me like it's a strong case for Valle really getting a run in the team in the left back berth.
James, what's your thoughts on everything Alan's just said there? Any disagreements, agreements?
I think, given the current iteration of Greg Taylor, I don't disagree. I think he's had a rough patch. We've talked about it for weeks now, empathizing the human element with him being in a somewhat difficult situation that, and I just, not like worst thing happening to a human being, but being in an uncertainty with a young family, not knowing what your future is, that can be stressful. And certainly the events of the last few days would probably not help that, one would think. So, I empathize with that. But I agree with that. I mean, to me, the question, the way Taylor has been playing, it's kind of an easy call, I think, because the one thing that I would think, if he's playing well, would give him an edge over Valle would be that ball security, is that inverted midfielder. I mean, kind of when he's, really cranking, that's the position that he has fit pretty well and done a reasonably good job at Celtic. That's pretty much it. Like most of the other stuff from the profile. And my concern with Valle has been that he's shown signs of having a persistent issue that, of ball security at inopportune times, that Taylor has been showing in spades recently, unfortunately, right? So if it's a chronic issue for Valle, and this is like a new weird thing that's going on with Taylor, which kind of has been, then, I as long as Taylor's got this form issue and some of these lingering issues as far as his future goes, Valle's bigger, Valle's faster, Valle's, I take a little bit of issue with that. I think he is, like all other things equal, because of those issues, I'd skew him a little better defensively, not like dramatically, but because I think Taylor's okay positionally. But he's probably better in the final third as far as overlapping and whipping crosses in. So he actually does align more with a Kieran Tierney-esque model of fullback. I'm not saying he's anywhere in the same neighborhood quality wise, but so it goes back to the issues. Do you want players that complement each other, can do different roles, or do you want someone that's similar just as a backup who's not as good? But yeah, I'd have zero problem with Valle taking over the starting position until we find out what goes on with the transfer window. I also get the human element of this, not wanting to cut Taylor off at the knees, given his status at the club, what he's, sacrificed. Because again, this has been my MO with him the entire time, like from a professionalism, from, improving oneself with the raw materials one has from an athletic perspective, and a commitment as a professional to do it. He's been stellar, like A+++. Like, he seems like a guy he has to have embraced 24/7 athlete lifestyle. All of these things that you need to do to get the most out of yourself. He seems like a consummate professional. He's been a team guy. Like, I get why he might react to something that happened on Sunday in a way that, if it's true that that's what happened, like, that's human. Like, I get that. He's in the midst of maybe trying to figure out his future, and it's sometimes reality just doesn't work out. Like, if I'm him, I probably don't want a backup's wage, and if I'm Celtic, I probably don't want to pay for 2 starting left backs. That's not a smart allocation of resources. So sometimes it just doesn't work, and you end up with transitions in life, and sometimes that's messy and uncomfortable and not fun. So yeah, I think it might be the smart thing to do, not only because of the performance, but the human side of it is give him a little bit of a break, but I also get why you might not want to be seen responding to that if you're the manager, because, you're not supporting him or that kind of thing. So it's kind of a complicated mess.
Yeah, if one was being devil's advocate, one might suggest that the potential signing of Kieran Tierney wouldn't represent a reliable and consistently available choice if he was to come back. However, I'm not that person. I'm not going to say that.
No one would ever label you in that way, Laura. And if they did, they'd have Alan and me to deal with.
Absolutely. I know we'll keep things short because I know people have places to go, things to do. I, for example, have this to read. Unfortunately, they didn't have a Marco Negri one in the. I
was going to say, is that Derek Ferguson?
Yeah, no, that's some. I think Henrik something. Anyway, yeah, I'm going off to read that after we finish this recording. But before we do, Alan, I'll come to you first. Dundee United tomorrow night.
Aye. Yeah.
What can we expect from them as opponents? And what do we need to do to kind of up the tempo of our game, if you like, or get things back on track a little bit more?
Yeah, so listen, Dundee United obviously having a really good season. It's not necessarily unlike poor old Aberdeen, who were outperforming their underlying performance numbers to quite an outrageous degree. And hey, guess what's happened? Dundee United actually, posted some pretty good numbers. The decent attacking threat. I think their average XG per game is 1.46, which is good, very good actually. They've actually got the second highest average XG per shot, which is one of the more important metrics, I would suggest. It means that they're creating good quality chances. Celtic are still out. I mean, this is Opta data that I'm using for this, by the way. Celtic are 0.14. They're the best in the league. Dundee United are second, actually, in that regard. And not surprisingly, they 73% of their shots they take inside the box, which is the best in the league. Celtic are only 66%. So they're taking good shots from good positions. They're on the other end of the field. They are, they're overperforming on goals against. So their average XG against is 1.26, but they're only conceding just over 1 goal a game. But they don't concede a lot of goals on top. They seem to be very good at suppressing shots. Actually, their goalkeeper number of saves they make is not exorbitant, and they've actually got the joint lowest XG. Average XG per shot against 0.09. So shot suppression seems to be something they're very good at, denying the other team good opportunities. And they're just starting to, if you sort of plot expected goals for and against, you've obviously got Celtic, then you've got sort of the Rangers, and then you've just got the rump of the rest of the league, and they all swap places every week depending on what the results are. But Dundee United have just started to kind of form a little island of one. They're just kind of, like a little stray iceberg. They're just kind of broken off a little chunk there and heading into that sort of virtuous territory. So, yeah, it's not a fluke where they are. And as I say, I've just covered some of the highlight metrics there. show that it's not, as I say, it's not unexpected, and that they are posting good numbers. They obviously lost at Hearts. They'd been on a good run. They'd won 3 games in a row prior to that. They've not lost many of the last. They've lost 2 of the last 10 games. They had an incredible game against Motherwell, 4-3. They've got a pretty tight squad. So although they don't change the personnel per se, they do change up. How they set up. So sometimes it's a back 3, sometimes it's a back 5, sometimes it's a back 4, sometimes it's 1 up front, sometimes it's 2 up front, sometimes it's a 3-4-3. So they've even gone to a 4-4-2 when they went to Ibrox. So I'm not sure what we're going to get. The last time that they played us, it was a 4-4-1-1. Which was a variation on what they'd played at Ibrox. So I think we'll probably see something very similar. I think Goodwin, by his nature, tends to have a defensive outlook in these sort of games. They've got Sam Dalby, who 10 league goals. I mean, that's pretty tasty. He's a big unit up front. He's another big guy, but he's having a great season for them. So plenty to, I think, excite the fans, excite the neutral, shall we say. So it's going to be a testing game. And as I say, credit to them. They're posting a good season so far.
Yeah. James, anything to add to that?
What I'll say is, we talked about it when we previewed the game at Tannadice, and I expressed my anxiety that it was the kind of quintessential 0-0 type of setup going into it, partly because of how Goodwin is likely to set them up and did set them up, and the smaller confines of their pitch that kind of lend themselves to a style of play that is leans towards them versus us. To their credit, and this is in direct contrast to what McInnes's Kilmarnock has done when they've been doing, not right now, but when they have been doing well in the past, is that Kilmarnock is dominant at home and then has trouble adjusting when they're away. To Dundee United's credit, they've been much better at home, but they've also been good enough on the road where they're playing well enough that they're picking up points and they're kind of grinding out results and being competitive. So they're not getting blown away on the road like I said, like a McInnes Kilmarnock has in the past. So that makes, to me, just naturally, it's going to be a better situation for us because there'll be more space if they're playing compact and narrow. But yeah, I agree with Alan. Like, I'd be surprised if it's not some version of what they did at Tannadice, more defensive, and back to this old issue. They do have a striker that can score, take a chance, which not everyone does. So yeah, I think it could be one of those games where. And I'm hoping coming out of Sunday, people are a little more patient, and because we might need it in this kind of setup. This is a setup that I think is obvious that it could be problematic, at least for a stretch of the game. Whereas, St. Mirren didn't really present any of that.
Yeah, sorry, just one little vignette to add. We talked earlier about styles of play and the way the league is in general. They are the longest of long ball teams. They are by one pass attempt the most long balls of any team in the league as well. So for what it's worth, now they tend to often play with two quicker players out wide. So Dalby's not going to run away from probably Trusty and Carter Vickers for sure, but he'll challenge for the through ball, for the high balls, and as I say, they do tend to put pace in the wide areas, and as I say, they'll be shelling it, I suspect.
Yeah, well, we shall see how it unfolds tomorrow night, or if you're watching it on Celtic TV, perhaps you won't see how it unfolds tomorrow night.
It's next Friday, yeah.
I believe it's going to be available on the same basis as the weekend, that I think people in the UK and Ireland will be able to buy it pay-per-view. No word from Celtic on whether there will be a refund for Sunday's game or whether there will be a reduced rate, but... Yep.
Sorry, Laura. Just to be fair to Celtic, I think they're offering it to the pay-per-view rather than its normal prices, something like $12.99. I think they're offering it for something like $5.99 and then $4.99 if you're a Celtic TV subscriber. So to be fair to them, they've taken a big chunk, I think, off of the fee for this one.
That is very fair. I wasn't aware of that. So consider myself suitably. I'll retract that somewhat caustic statement. Thank you very much, Alan.
Only that one, mate. Only that one. Yeah.
Only that one. Only that one. Let's not get into any other conversations. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, James. It has been another enjoyable one, and you guys will be back obviously later on in the week as you always are, and I will be back with you next week.